Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 5, Part 1. I'm going to split the tutorial for Act 1, Scene 5 into two, and the two halves are going to revolve around Lady Macbeth's two key speeches in this scene. And of course, Act 1, Scene 5 is a vitally important scene because it introduces the character of Lady Macbeth to the audience. And remember that in terms of a tragedy, which Macbeth is, Lady Macbeth acts as one of the influences on the tragic hero, the protagonist, Macbeth, who, although he is entirely responsible for the choices that he makes that leads to his downfall, he has these influences. We've already met the witches, now we meet the second of those influences, Lady Macbeth. At the beginning of Scene 5, we are told that we are now in Inverness, which is where Macbeth's castle is. Lady Macbeth enters the stage alone, and she's carrying a letter. The first words that we hear from Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 5 are not her own words. She is reading the letter that Macbeth has sent to her. Now, the letter predominantly summarises, both for the benefit of the audience, but also for the character of Lady Macbeth, what's been happening to Macbeth in the last few hours. And of course, the reason that Shakespeare does this, one, to summarise events for the audience in case they've not been paying full attention, but also, of course, Lady Macbeth has not been on the scene of the battles, nor has she been in the scene with the witches, and so therefore the letter is bringing her up to speed with what Macbeth has experienced on that particular day. So this is how her speech begins, this letter that she's reading. They met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report that they have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air into which they vanished. Whiles I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, came missives from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me, and referred me to the coming on of time with Hail, King that shalt be. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Lay it to thy heart, and farewell. So that's the end of the letter that Lady Macbeth is reading. And as you can see, the information that Macbeth is including in this letter summarises the things that he's recently experienced. When he begins, or rather when the scene begins, we imagine, and Shakespeare often does this, he often starts scenes in a way I describe as almost halfway through a conversation. We don't hear the very beginning of a conversation quite often in Shakespeare. We come in a few lines in, and that's what's happening here, because obviously Macbeth's letter must have other information in it than what we're presented with here. But Shakespeare chooses to start this scene at the point where Lady Macbeth has got to the bit in the letter where Macbeth has mentioned the witches. They met me in the day of success. The they, of course, is referring to the witches. The day of success refers to the fact that he's just had these two victories in the rebellion and then in the invasion, fighting for Duncan. He even references, remember in Act 1, Scene 3, after the witches had given him the prophecies, he wanted to know more, but they vanished. He references this in the letter. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air into which they vanished. He then writes about the missives from the king, the messengers from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me. So he's bringing Lady Macbeth up to speed with the fact that I got this prophecy about being Thane of Cawdor, and only a few moments later, messengers arrived from Duncan, and I was made Thane of Cawdor. And it also reminds Lady Macbeth, or rather brings her up to speed with the fact that aside from this prophecy of being Thane of Cawdor, They referred me to the coming on of time with "Hail, King that shalt be." So now Lady Macbeth is well aware of the two prophecies. One of them, about becoming Thane of Cawdor, has already come true. That suggests that the prophecy about Macbeth becoming king in the future will also come true. Macbeth justifies why he has sent this letter ahead of him, because remember, Macbeth is on his way back to his castle in order to get ready for Duncan's feast. He could have told Lady Macbeth when he arrived, but he chooses not to. He sends a letter on ahead of him with a messenger, and this is why he's done it. He justifies it at the end of his letter. "This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee." In other words, I wanted you to know of the greatness that is awaiting you in the future. Because, of course, if Macbeth becomes king, then Lady Macbeth is going to become queen. So she will rise in status as well. There is, I believe, one key line in this letter that I want to draw your attention to now. And it's something that can easily be overlooked because it's surrounded, firstly, by the summary of what's happened, and then the justification that Macbeth gives for sending the letter on ahead of him in the first place. And it's this line. He says, or rather, he writes, "This have I thought good to deliver thee," and here's the key line, "my dearest partner of greatness." Why is this so important? Well, it tells us something about the nature of the relationship between Macbeth and his wife. Fast forwarding a little bit. In 2 scenes' time, Lady Macbeth is going to be able to persuade a reluctant Macbeth that he's going to have to murder Duncan in order to become king. In order for that to happen, Shakespeare has to establish the fact that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are very close in their relationship. They love each other greatly. I've said before that there is a lack of stage direction in Shakespeare. It's just the way the plays were published and probably exactly how they were written. There is no stage direction. And I'm leaping ahead here within this scene. When Macbeth arrives back at the castle, which he does towards the second half of this scene, and I'll be covering this in the second tutorial, there is no stage direction to say what happens between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth when he actually arrives back at the castle. But what you will often see in stage productions and film productions of Macbeth is that when Macbeth arrives home, he does what any husband would do if he's been away from his wife for a while. There is a tender moment of intimacy between them, embraces and kisses and so on. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth love each other. They have a strong relationship. We know that from this line, "my dearest partner of greatness." So that dearest tells us, communicates to us the love that Macbeth has for his wife. But there's more. Notice that she is described by him as "my dearest partner of greatness." Shakespeare is renowned for creating strong roles for women. And for the time, remember this is the early 17th century when he's writing this, for the time, some of his female characters are actually rather subversive in that they subvert the stereotypes of the day. In the 17th century, there was nothing like gender equality. Women were firmly second-class citizens. They were dominated by the men in society, and therefore, in a relationship, you would expect the woman to be subservient and submissive to her much more dominant husband. And yet, what does Shakespeare do here? He establishes that Macbeth sees his wife very much as an equal, my dearest partner of greatness. He sees his wife as being on the same level socially and in terms of status as he is, which very much goes against the thinking of the time, both the 11th century when the play is set and also the 17th century when the play is written. So do bear that in mind. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have a strong and loving relationship, and Macbeth sees his wife as an equal. Quite a subversive view. The letter comes to its end, and we hear Lady Macbeth's own words for the first time, and immediately we get an inkling into her character. Now, before I have a look at this speech for you, I'm going to introduce you to a new dramatic term. The term is soliloquy. A soliloquy is an extended monologue, a monologue being when you have one person on stage speaking. Monologue equals one speaker. A soliloquy is an extended monologue which is often delivered to the audience for the audience's benefit, in which we get an insight into what's going on in the mind of that character. Remember, we've had asides earlier in the play, which do pretty much the same thing, but they're much shorter. A soliloquy is like an extended aside, one speaker sharing with the audience their thoughts. And so, Lady Macbeth, in her own words, begins. Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, thy wouldest thou holily. Wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Thou dost have, great Glamis, that which cries, thus thou must do if thou have it, and that which rather thou dost fear to do than wishes should be undone. Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal. So what's that about? Let me take you through this soliloquy, looking at the key lines in order. She begins her speech, Glamis thou art. We know that Macbeth is the Thane of Glamis. That is the title that he's had since the beginning of the play. Now she acknowledges that he is also Thane of Cawdor, but this is the first key line of this speech. And shalt be what thou art promised. You are already Thane of Glamis. You are now Thane of Cawdor, and you shall be king. You shall be what you have been promised. This immediately establishes Lady Macbeth as a determined character. You have been promised this. It will happen. Another key point I want to raise to you here. Lady Macbeth has trusted completely what Macbeth has written about in his letter, which again demonstrates the strength of their relationship. Because just imagine yourselves in this position. If somebody wrote me a letter or an email, somebody close to me wrote a letter or an email and said, "Hi darling, I was on my way home tonight from work, and on the way home I met these three witches, and they predicted my future, and they told me that one day I was going to be king. I'll be back home soon. Bye for now. I'd probably think, as this individual been, in Banquo's words, eating on an insane route, or have they had one too many cherryades on the way home? This is completely fantastic news. Almost unbelievable. I met three witches on my way home from battle, and they've told me that I'm going to be king in future. Lady Macbeth does not doubt it for one moment. She does not question her husband. She trusts his word absolutely. And I would also suggest it shows that she has, and this is important for her character, it shows that she has a keen belief in the promises and the powers of the supernatural. She does not doubt for one moment that Macbeth is going to be king in the future, and shalt be what thou art promised. And this is so often delivered with a tone of determination. This is going to happen. It proves that she's a determined character. She goes on. Yet I do fear thy nature. Now, when she says this, she's not saying that she's frightened of her husband. Far from it. That's not what she's admitting to at all. What she's saying is, there's a problem. You shall be what you are promised. You shall be king. But I'm a bit worried about your nature. I'm a bit worried about your personality. I'm a bit worried about your character. She elaborates further about the thing that worries her. It, meaning your character, your personality, is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. The problem with you, husband, is you're too nice. You're too kind. You are too compassionate. Your character is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. By to catch the nearest way, she means to get what you need by cheating and being underhand and deceptive if you have to. Slowly but surely, in fact, not that slowly really, definitely very surely, we are getting a keen insight into Lady Macbeth's character. She is very dismissive of the idea of compassion. She is criticizing her husband for being too compassionate. She clearly is not a compassionate individual. She sees being compassionate, being kind, as a weakness. And of course, think again about what I've already said about the fact that Lady Macbeth, as a female character, subverts the stereotypes of the time. Remember that women were supposed to be maternal. They were supposed to have the softer emotions of kindness and compassion and maternal instincts. And here she's saying that she does not rate kindness and compassion. In fact, she's worried about the fact that her husband is too full of kindness and compassion to get what he needs by cheating. It's not all criticism, though. She says, thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition. She acknowledges that her husband does have ambition, that he has ambition to be great. But, and she uses the word but, without the illness should attend it. In other words, she acknowledges the fact that Macbeth has ambition, but she also says that he lacks the determination, the wickedness, the cruelty, the ruthlessness to actually carry out that ambition. That's what she means when she references illness. He does not have the ruthlessness and the cruel desire to get what he wants. So again, if she's criticizing the lack of those qualities in Macbeth, it suggests that she has those qualities within her character. She has the qualities of wickedness and cruelty. What thou wouldst highly, thou wouldst thou holily. In other words, you'd go about doing things in the right way, the moral way, the holy way. That's not what she would do. She says about Macbeth, wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. If you've been paying close attention to that line, you will note that it is another example of paradox in the play. Lady Macbeth is not beyond the use of the paradox. You wouldn't cheat, you wouldn't play false, and yet you would wrongly win. You would win something which was not necessarily meant for you if you could have it, and yet at the same time you wouldn't cheat to get there. It's another of these contradictions and paradoxes that doesn't appear to make a great deal of sense, and yet the use of that paradox links Lady Macbeth with the forces of darkness. She's not a witch, she's a mortal human being, although if you read widely and critically about the play Macbeth, you will see some critics who have put forward the idea that Lady Macbeth is the fourth witch of the play. I actually think that's complete nonsense. She is a mortal, she is not a supernatural being, but she's using language that links with those ideas of darkness and evil and the supernatural. Moving a little bit further on, she wants to be able to inspire Macbeth, to get him to put aside his, in her view, weaker morals and follow the advice that she's going to give in order that he can get the crown. She says a few lines later on, "Hie thee hither, come home quickly, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round. Come home quickly, so that I can inspire you with my ideas." When she talks about pouring my spirits in thine ear, she is saying, I will give you the advice that you need. I will give you the tactics that you should employ so that you can eventually get what she refers to as the golden round. Literally, the crown, if you think about it, a crown is a ring of gold. And so she, I know she's on stage on her own at this moment, but she is coming out with language that would have seemed incredibly subversive at the time the play was written. And listening to this and watching this today, she comes across as being the dominant figure in this relationship. Come home quickly so I can tell you what to do. Remember, Macbeth is the male, Macbeth is the lord, Macbeth is the great warrior who has just saved Duncan's kingdom, and here she is saying, you come home to me, and I, the woman, will give you the advice and tell you what to do. Interesting use of the word spirits, I think, because if you think it's got something of a double meaning. By spirits, she means passion and enthusiasm. But of course, this is a play with a heavy supernatural influence, so we can't overlook the double meaning of spirits here as reference to the supernatural. When she says that she's going to chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, if you chastise somebody, it means you tell them off. Now, she's not saying she's going to tell Macbeth off, but what she's saying here is she's going to use the valour, the bravery of her tongue and her ideas in order to get rid of anything in Macbeth's mind, in other words, his morals, and the desire to do the right thing, which are impeding him. She used the word impedes here. If something impedes you, it stops you from doing something. So she's saying, I'm going to use my enthusiasm and my inspiration to take away all of those moral scruples that you have within you that will stop you getting the crown. Now, of course, although she's not come out explicitly and said it, it's quite obvious that she is wanting Macbeth to do something ruthless and cruel and evil in order to get the crown. And of course, she is hinting, not very subtly, at the idea of murder. The reason she feels that she has to push this agenda of murder is because her husband's too weak to do it on his own. By weak, she means too moral and too good. But she sums up this speech, she concludes this speech by saying that fate and metaphysical aid being the supernatural, clearly have decided that the crown is to be yours. You are going to be crowned with all. So all we're going to be doing is fulfilling what fate and the supernatural have said is going to happen anyway. She can't get any further in her speech because a messenger comes in. In some scripts, it says an attendant. This attendant sort of interrupts Lady Macbeth's flow of thoughts as this soliloquy comes to its end. And she says to the messenger, "What is your tidings? What news have you got to bring me?" The attendant says, "The king comes here tonight." Lady Macbeth thinks this is ridiculous news. Why would King Duncan be coming here? She says to the attendant, "Thou art mad to say it. Is not thy master with him? Isn't Macbeth with him? Who, were it so, would inform for preparation. Surely Macbeth would have told me if Duncan was coming here." But the attendant says, "So please you, it is true. Our Thane is coming. One of my fellows had the speed of him, who, almost dead for breath, had scarcely more than would make up his message." So Lady Macbeth, initially thinking that the messenger is incorrect, how can Duncan be coming here? There are no plans for Duncan to come here. The messenger convinces Lady Macbeth that, oh yes, Macbeth is actually on his way now to get ready for the king's arrival and the feast. And this messenger that's run ahead in order to give us this news is completely knackered and completely shattered, which is why Lady Macbeth says, "Give him tending." She's talking about the messenger who's brought this news. "Give him tending. He brings great news." And the attendant goes off to do whatever the attendant has been ordered to do. And of course, the reason that she says that the messenger has brought great news is because the plan is already working in her mind that Duncan is going to have to be murdered if Macbeth is going to become king. And now it transpires that Duncan is going to be spending the night in Macbeth's castle, which is going to make killing him so much more straightforward. Hence the reason she describes the news that the messenger has brought as great. That's where we're going to end the first part of this tutorial. The second part of the tutorial for Act 1, Scene 5 will deal with Lady Macbeth's second key soliloquy in this scene, in which she calls upon the forces of the supernatural to aid her in this plan. And then Macbeth arrives back at his castle and an important discussion takes place. So join me for the second part of this tutorial in the near future.